there's a split even between maybe you and me in certain theologies, like paedobaptism. Okay. So I go to a church. I don't know if I'd consider myself a member as of yet, but my family attends a church that they practice paedobaptism. Now, we are not paedobaptists. But what I see some people attempting to do, and this isn't a down on those people, I understand it, just like you've kind of described. We naturally want to fit into these groups. We want to attract people around us. So this isn't a dig on anybody, but it's like saying, trying to make Pronomian into a sect or into a denomination or into a movement or whatever you want to say is kind of like saying, well, we're Paedobaptists. Like it's like trying to take that one issue and make it into the focal point issue. Now, I understand that the law, obviously, as someone who loves the law and is trying to learn the law and live out the law, I understand that this is a central issue for many people and why it's a central issue. I think that every Christian, no matter if they consider themselves pronomian or not, at some point has to deal with the fact that obviously the Bible is the standard. And that leads me to the other thing that I've kind of been working through. Like, there's such a wide spectrum of what pronomian could be. And so I've thought about the idea of, could a Catholic be pronomian? And the reason why is because ultimately I've waffled back and forth on this, and I guess I'm kind of asking you your thoughts on this. And the reason why I've waffled back and forth on this is not because I don't think that a Catholic can, and let's say Roman Catholic, it's not that I don't think a Roman Catholic can say, I want to keep the Sabbath on Saturday, as opposed to what the Catholic Church does, or I want to keep a kosher diet. Certainly, a Roman Catholic can do that and believe that. But ultimately, I think that the way that I've kind of thought of pronomian in my own way is that the law of God is the standard by which we are interpreting things. And the way that I've understood Roman Catholicism is that, no, the councils are also brought into, like, almost man-made. I don't want to down anyone, but obviously the councils are not the standard above or at the same level as God's law. And so that's why I've kind of flip-flopped back and forth on Roman Catholicism. I know this has gotten into a weird place, but it's just kind of something that I've, just working through the ideas of what is pronomianism, or what is the theology of pronomian. I don't want to exclude anyone. In terms of, it's not an exclusionary, it's not a club. I guess that's what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? It's not a club like you're in and you're out.
Right.
And so I guess the question that I'm trying to ask you is, how big of a sliding scale can the term pronomian encompass?
It's very broad. I mean, the reality is that the only thing that pronomian really means is that God's law is still relevant for Christians today. I mean, that's it. Because antinomian in and of itself was, there were people historically that have completely discounted the law, and in many cases, even the entirety of the Old Testament, and said the only thing that matters now is the New Testament. Well, we're saying no, that's not the only thing that matters. All of the entire scope of God's wisdom in the Scripture is relevant to us today. It isn't even a statement about how it matters, right? Because there are people out there that believe it matters in various different ways. So an example you have is somebody like Jeff Durbin or Doug Wilson, who they're theonomists, and they think that God's civil law matters, God's moral law matters, but that the aspects of what they would call ceremonial is irrelevant. And they put some other things under that ceremonial category that I wouldn't agree with, but those things are irrelevant. And but those people are definitely pronomian, right? Because they believe God's law has applicability today. They believe that Paul was deferring to God's law to develop doctrine. That's pronomian. Now, you're going to have people that think, hey, you know what, we should keep the Passover. Great. But then you have groups out there that still believe that you should still slaughter a lamb on Passover.
Right.
Which you and I would say no.
Right.
No, absolutely not. And now, between me and you, and the person that thinks they should slaughter the lamb on Passover, and then Jeff Durbin, we all have a view that the law is still relevant, but we think there are certain contingencies therein that make its applicability translate differently into our given context. Okay. And so, but that's sort of an irrelevancy, because the reality is that we all believe that it still matters. What we're now quibbling over are the contingencies.
Sure.
Right. The contingencies therein. And so I think that there need to be certain distinctions made. And as doctrine develops with regard to pronomianism, there needs to be some of these contingencies need to be spelled out. And I think it's really important. Like, we look at like dietary laws. Well, why aren't those ceremonial? So I think some of those things need to be hashed out. I think that when we're talking about when many of the people that I know are identifying as pronomian or talking about pronomianism, what they're really referring to is what I'm calling Old Testament sacramentalism, right? It's not even me calling it. Like that's just a purely historical word that Puritans have used for a long time. But Old Testament sacramentalism, and they believe that the festivals are still relevant to us today. And some Christians today, we just observe Pentecost at my church here, and they don't think the festivals are necessarily still necessary. Apparently, they do still think that Pentecost is still necessary. So, in some ways, they are holding to a version of that. So, again, that's where I think that we've got to be a bit more careful in how we're framing it. And I think we need to look at the different ways in which pronomianism can take form. So that way we're not, like you said, because here's the thing, no matter what we say, we can try to monopolize this term, and we can try to say, hey, we're appropriate it for ourselves. No one's going to let us do that. All you're going to do is categorize yourself under the Hebrew roots or crazy banner of theology. That's all you're going to do.
Right.
No Christian is going to let you just appropriate the term pronomian and say, hey, this means for sure that you have to keep the Passover. It's like there are pronomian people that do not believe that. So we need to develop doctrine out to say, hey, what falls under the umbrella of pronomianism, and quit making it our entire identity. There are other people like Jeff Durbin and Doug Wilson who would call themselves pronomian, but they're not. I mean, Doug Wilson, actually, I'm part of the same denomination as Doug Wilson, is going to tell you he's a Presbyterian.
Sure.
Because Presbyterianism represents an entire set of doctrine,